That's fine. That happened to everyone.
Oh man, we're off to a great start here. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. I am, of course, Bryan Armentrout with the Food Safety Foundation with my good friend Jose Sabal of Sabal Consulting. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. We just woke up laughing, so that's good.
Yeah. So technical issues when you're doing something like this are always part of the game. And we were getting ready to go on, and I can't hear Jose. And I'm like, oh, geez, are the settings wrong? Are your settings wrong? Let's log out. The clock is going tick, 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 tick as we're getting here to 8 o'clock Mountain Time. And we're like, oh my God. And then finally I look over, I've got external speakers for my computer, and the volume was off.
So things happen all the time.
Well, at the very least, it got our adrenaline going. That is for sure. So everybody, please type in the chat and say hello and let us know where you're from and who, your name. And it's amazing. We get people from Germany and Turkey and all around the world who come to this live stream to kind of talk about food safety with us, and we love. I am, of course, in Loveland, Colorado, USA, where the weather today, Jose, is going to be gorgeous. Low 80s. Sunny day, a little bit of rain coming over the weekend for Mother's Day, but we'll take what we get.
So I can move to Loveland, Colorado right now, because today we are going to have UV in 11.
There's an 11? Wow.
11 today. So that means that it's extremely dangerous to be outside and to be direct sunlight. And most likely, Bryan, we're going to remain like that until November, December.
How's the humidity?
Well, today it started a little bit high, but I believe that between, I'm going to say between 12 and 4 p.m., something like that, we are going to have a little bit before 60.
Nice.
Which is nice for Florida. That's nice.
That's nice. You take it. So I see we have some of our lovely friends here. Melody's here and Jill is here. Always good to see them. We have Stacy from Medina, New York. Stacy, I used to live in Buffalo. I lived in Williamsville. I ran quality for Sorrento Lactalis Group up there. So nice to see somebody from that neck of the woods. Austin in Denver, great to see you again. Barbara down in Tempe. My good friend Bryan out in San Diego. Good to see you, my friend. Wow, look at all these wonderful people joining us today. Richard in Nashville. We got another person in Florida. So Miramar. Nice.
No, that's me. That's me.
Oh, it just says LinkedIn.
Yeah, Melody was asking where I'm located. I'm in Miramar, Florida. Very close to Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. Now, is that a military location, or is that something, not another location?
No, Bryan, that's the one in California.
Okay.
What is the Top Gun, training academy for jet flyers and that jet pilots?
Sudeshna said she lived in Williamsville too. It's a small world that we live in, that's for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, very interesting. So guys, we have a very interesting topic today, and this was a suggestion from someone watching the live stream, which we absolutely love. So we're going to be going over the topic today, Jose, of environmental monitoring.
Oh my goodness. So we are going to have fun today, Bryan. I can tell.
Oh yeah. So for people who are new to the show, and so we have a gentleman joining us in Thailand. I would try and pronounce your name, sir, but I would totally destroy it. But good day to you, whatever time it is in Thailand. Beautiful country, Thailand.
Oh yes.
So with the live stream, what we do here is we bring up topics around food safety and discuss it, and that's what it is. This is a discussion, right? This is just not us going through PowerPoint slides and giving you some information. You go, wait, this is a back and forth. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat. And again, we're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So we see the comments from those as they're appearing. So please let us know what you'd like to know, and we'll dive into it right away. But first, Jose, before we
hold on.
Everybody,
okay,
if you have a drink handy, please grab your favorite beverage and join us for a drink.
Oh, this is so nice.
Ooh, mine's coffee, and Jose, of course, has his tea. What flavor of
Yes.
tea do you have today?
No, green tea. Same
Green tea.
as, yeah, same as always.
You're consistent. I am too. We coffee with cream. So,
Okay.
oh, UAE. I've been to Dubai. So I'm kind of hitting the list here of people. India. Have not been to India. Hopefully everything's going okay for you, Jilson. The rest of the world is definitely hearing about what's going on in India with COVID. So
Yeah,
good luck
I
to
went
you
to
and
the
everybody there.
southern part, and it's a beautiful country. I can tell you that.
Ah, wonderful. So environmental monitoring. So
Hmm.
I tell you, going into this, and I'm going to kind of tease this a little bit. After I completed my research, Jose, the way I did environmental monitoring, I've changed my mind. I'm going to have to go back to my clients and revisit environmental monitoring with my clients, because based on what I learned and what FDA is now doing, people need to change.
Yep. Yeah. So, Brian, look at this. Now that you are with that introduction that you just put in place, and we have been helping a lot of people, setting up environmental monitoring programs. I agree with you that after we have that information, we should be changing the way that we're doing business. So I would like to start, Brian, explaining what is in the regulation for
Mm,
environmental monitoring. So we can start off by having a good conversation with some requirements. 117, which is a preventive control for human food. 117, 165, verification of implementation and effectiveness. And
mm,
the first section says verification activities, and it says you must verify and prevent that the preventive controls are consistently implemented. And now we have that word from systems again in the regulation, and that they are effective. And in 117, 165, A as in Apple, 3, it
mhm,
says environmental monitoring. And it says that you, anyone that needs to set up an environmental monitoring program for an appropriate indicator organism is written that we need to define what is going to be tested. If contamination of a ready to eat food with an environmental pathogen is a hazard that requires a preventive control.
mhm.
That's how the regulation starts.
Yes. And part of within this, what FDA is saying, if you need a program, right? So what they're saying is if you're ready to eat, or if you're high risk, or things like this as defined within the regs, you need to and are required to have a preventive control for environmental monitoring. Now, if you're outside of that category, should you have an environmental monitoring program anyway? Yes, you should, right? You should still have an environmental monitoring program. I don't care, right? You need to understand, because risks change. And we are constantly surprised by recalls for products that we didn't think were risky that contain pathogens. And we're just like, oh my God, how did that happen, right? You
Yeah.
need to start gathering that data, right? So, kind of in the past, right? Environmental monitoring was kind of is like, see no evil, hear no evil, do no evil, right? Okay, we're going to do a few samples in the environment. We'll look at some drains. We'll do maybe some generic listeria, and that's it, right? If we don't find anything, that means there's nothing in the plant, right? That is out, right? That is completely wrong, right? If you're just doing that,
Yeah.
FDA, when they come in, is going to ignore that, right? And we'll get into that detail right now, because one of the key things, the operations, I always get the name mixed up, right? It is, the FDA calls it their Investigations Operation Manual, IOM. It's a
Yeah.
giant 500-page document that you can get. And by the way, I can get you a copy, right? Just send me an email and I'll get you a copy. Which was just revised 2021. And they have a lot to say in there on how to do environmental monitoring. If you're not mirroring what they're doing, you're wasting a lot of time. Right? And I think really,
Yeah.
Jose, this kind of goes back to FDA started changing their thinking with Bluebell ice cream and the whole issue that happened there with their big recall for listeria and ice cream. So in 2016 and 17, FDA did a big ice cream company survey for environmental testing. And they actually have published this survey. And I went through this and looked at it. And there's some interesting information here for everybody. So they looked at 89 facilities for pathogens. And they did LM testing, Listeria monocytogenes, and they also did salmonella testing. Of those 89 facilities, 2 they made companies recall. 1 because they found an undeclared milk allergen. The other, they had Listeria in zone 1s and zone 2. And we'll go over zones here in a little bit, right? So they made that company voluntarily recall all the product, and that company quit manufacturing. They just now distribute. So of that, then another 7%, they had positives in either zone 2 or zone 3, and FDA had meetings with those companies, right? So you can imagine what those meetings were about.
No, yes.
And another 43% had corrective actions, and 43 of the 89, so just about half, 48%, they didn't find anything. So glass half empty kind of guy. Only half of the plants passed successfully the FDA environmental monitoring. Only half.
Yeah.
And I think FDA looked at this and went, whoa, we got a problem here, right? We need to revamp how we're looking at these programs. So you need to kind of look at this with your program, so Jose, in 2 different areas, right? There's your program, which we're kind of going to get into what you should be doing. But the other way you need to think about it too is your reaction to what you have, right? So there's your own internal reaction of you find positives, what do you do? And then also your reaction when FDA comes in, because you need to be ready for both of those.
Yep. So look at these, Bryan. I mean, 100% with you on your comment. And maybe this is a good time to mention that everything that we have here about the swabatons, well, this is exactly, the purpose of these swabatons. So now, if we approach this from systems standpoint, I'm going to start my portion saying, okay, which are the legal requirements first? In 117, 165, B3, the FDA is listing exactly all the specific requirements for environmental monitoring. And the FDA says that must be scientifically valid, must identify the locations from which samples will be collected, the number of sites to be tested during routine, there is a frequency, routine environmental monitoring. The number and location of sampling sites must be adequate to determine whether if those preventive controls are effective, identify timing and frequency for collecting and testing samples. Frequency for collecting and testing samples must be adequate to determine if the preventive controls are effective. And basically, they are repeating the same thing. Identify the test conducted, the analytical method. There's so many different requirements, so specific in the regulation, that it's just amazing that if I go now to the SQF code to say something, just to look at some, GFSI-based standard, it says a risk-based environmental monitoring shall be in place, and the environmental sampling and testing schedule shall be prepared. So very similar to the FDA, detailing the pathogens and the number of samples, and yes, keep the results. Those are the specific requirements. So the frequency, yes, that frequency is defined by each and every single company. But if you read the risk-based approach from SQF, and then you read the regulation saying routine, saying repeating many times the word effective, that means that if you're not putting some frequency there, it's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. If you're only collecting 1 sample a quarter, you're fooling yourself, right? You're fooling yourself.
Yes.
So part of this too, and I think what different companies are trying to work through with this, right, is what should I sample for, right? So we've seen programs, I've looked at this too, right? All right, well, let's look at bigger classes of organisms that kind of contain lots of different things. So let's look at Enterobacter as a surrogate. And we'll look for Enterobacter in the environment right? We're not really looking for pathogens, but if we find it, right, we'll do some cleaning and things like that. Okay, maybe kind of useful for data gathering, but FDA is not looking at that at all.
Yeah, it's, I mean, uh, if I just think about it, because, Bryan, after I start reading and learning and I'm trying to understand the intention in the law, I
Mhm.
will always go back to that. And the law, when the FDA, not FDA, when the law defines what is adulteration, the
Mhm.
law indicates that whenever any company working with food, as defined also in the law, is working under insanitary conditions, those are grounds to make the product automatically adulterated.
Right.
That's it. And that definition of adulteration, remember that it's filth. If your product contains a piece of hair or a little bit of a food grade grease, the product is adulterated. It's not going to
Mhm.
cause illness or injury, but the product is adulterated. And
Right.
then, of course, whenever there is a hazard present, in the product, yes, the product is also adulterated at that point.
Right. So FDA is definitely looking at through this process zones, right? And we've all been thinking about zones too, right? So we'll kind of refresh everybody's memory kind of around what zones are, right? So zone one is anything that is food contact, right? So if you have a conveyor belt that's going along with food on it, that's a zone one. Anything that's touching the food is zone one. A zone two is anything that is adjacent to a zone one. So let's say, for example, and FDA loves sampling these, is let's say the buttons on a filling machine, right? Because the operator is touching product and then he's touching the button and he's touching product and he's touching the button. That's a zone two sampling site. Zone three then is a little bit farther away, but you're still in the environment around there, right? So let's say it's the legs of the machine or things like this, the floor that's directly under the machine, things like that. And then zone four is those areas outside of that right now. So this is still, and I think a good way to look at this, Jose, is you're still in the GMP area, right? Is FDA going to sample somebody's office? No, right? That's
No.
not going to be something that happens, right? Now, what FDA is doing, and this is interesting, we'll talk about this more, they're sampling zone one and they're sampling zone two. No three, no four. Unless there's some
Yes.
special circumstance they're looking for something specifically. All of their sampling is now zone one and zone two. And traditionally, and this is why yesterday I'm like, right as I'm looking at this, is what have we focused in the past, right? Zone three and zone four, right? We're going to sample drains, we're going to
Yeah.
sample floors. We are going to ignore zones one and two because if we clean these, then those should be clean. Nope.
Bryan, and you know what? I mean, even though that, and this is basically, a very generic approach. If the law requires that each and every single food company works under sanitary conditions each and every single second of operations, what is the only way that the products are going to be adulterated with the environment? Well, if any food contact surface actually is not clean enough. So it
Yeah.
makes sense for the FDA, in order to determine the level of cleanliness, to test zone one and zone two.
Mhm.
But one thing that we need to remember, Bryan, which I agree with you, and that we need to rethink a little bit the strategy that we are going to be using for our clients in the future. But I believe that there is some value in testing zone one and zone four. Why? Because most likely the organisms or whatever is going to potentially end up in the food contact surfaces is coming from the zone three and zone four.
Mhm.
So there is a value in testing the source of those organisms, and I will say, of course, we will need to test the food contact surfaces. I 100% agree with that, and even though that 99% of the world is against that, I'm one that says we need to test for these. Why? Because if you read the regulations and if you read the law and if you read the investigation operation manual of the FDA, you're going to be testing for zone ones. So why you are not testing for that?
Right. So yeah, I want to clarify my comments on that, Ryan. Is the emphasis, maybe this is a good way to say it, right? The emphasis was always on zone 3 and zone 4 and excluding
Yes.
zone 1 and zone 2. Flip it. Emphasize 1 and 2 and figure out 3 and 4 how it's getting into your plant, right? Is it coming on
Yes.
forklift wheels? Are people tracking it in on their shoes? How is it getting in the plant, right? That's how
Yep.
you need to think about this. So that's a really good point, Jose. Thank you for helping me think through that a little bit more.
Yep. Yep. And I was hearing a podcast, Brian, of a gentleman that they were having a huge recall, and the reason was environmental monitoring. And this guy start performing. Yes, it was a huge corporation, so they have the money. But what they did is they start a huge internal swabathon
Mhm.
in order to profile the different organisms that they may have and which are the sources, the niches of those organisms. So then this gentleman mentioned that they created then a map of the facility. So now they know which are the potential sources of those places, and this is going to help them to improve their cleaning operations because they now know better which are the organisms and where are those places where they are harboring places for that.
Yep. And that's a good point, right? So always remember that this information, as you stated, Jose, right? This is from a regulatory standpoint, this is under 117 and all the regulations for FSMA. FDA has full access to this data, right? This is part of your food safety programs and systems. FDA is not expecting perfection. You should be finding
Nope.
things. If you're not finding things in 3 and 4, you should have a good system. You don't find things in 1 and 2. You should be finding things 3 and 4 and then working to fix those, right? If FDA comes in and you have a crystal 100% 3-year record of sampling where you never find anything, they're going to raise an eyebrow because it means you're probably sampling in the wrong places.
Yeah. That program is not working. I mean, the gentleman on the podcast that I was hearing, he says, if you're looking good, you will find them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I worked for a really good operations manager one time, and we were talking about this. And he said, Brian, if I don't see about a 1 or 2% hit rate for the environmentals in zone 4, it means you're not looking hard enough. And I want to see them
Yeah.
on the reports. Okay. Melody's got a couple of good comments here. Zone 2 is crucial. It's critical and extremely important. Absolutely. And she also said it depends on how you set up the frequency and what's tested. Does FDA test Listeria monocytogenes in zone 1? Not a lot of facilities are testing for mono in zone 1. And Brian answered this and said yes. And Brian used to work for FDA. FDA swab zone 1 for L mono. They do.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they do now.
But you
So,
know what, Brian? That's another thing. Fine. We need to identify the organism of concern. I fully agree with that. But look at this. And this is my generic approach. I might be wrong. Oh, by the way, I might be wrong. And I want to say that ahead of time. But if the law requires working under sanitary conditions, my question is, as a generic approach to my environmental monitoring, my question will be, oh my goodness, if I need to maintain my environment clean, who cares if in my surface it's Listeria monocytogenes, Listeria innocua, Salmonella, E. coli, or any other organism that may just cause filth or degradation of the food or something? I don't care. Why? Because I'm not working under sanitary conditions at that point. So even if I'm using Enterobacter or something like that, I can have a feeling of what is the amount or the concentration. And it's not a chemical thing, but you know what? How many colonies we have of this? What is the content, the bacterial content, the biological content on food contact surfaces? And I
yeah.
need to make sure that my cleaning procedures, which is actually the control procedure, because environmental monitor, we need to make sure that we understand that that is just a verification of the cleaning activities. Okay.
Yes.
So with that map is when we are going to identify if the frequency of our cleaning procedures and the effectiveness of each of the how is effective enough to maintain those surfaces clean all the time.
Yep. And I think that's a great way to bucket it, right? Is as people are thinking through this, right, there's environmental monitoring for pathogens and there's sanitation verification, right? Very, very closely linked, right? You're overlapping things, but it's good to think about it in those two terms, right? So sanitation verification, ATP, SPC counts, Enterobacter, generic plate counts, APC. I think, am I doing a good job of cleaning, right? Because if things are clean, that means you're not going to hopefully have the other things. But the problem is in the past is we made that leap and said, yep, we're just going to assume that there's no pathogens there. So what FDA is saying is, okay, that's all well and good. Let's see how good you did. We're going to look for Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella in zone 1 and 2. And that's what the swabathons are, right?
And Bryan, you know what? I mean, a lot of people are reading lots of documents everywhere online and in Google and YouTube and whatever people want to search. But look at this. The FDA in the Investigation Operation Manual, there is a definition for zone 1 and zone 2 and zone 3 and zone 4. And that's exactly what you were mentioning. So let me just, read straight from, and by the way, Bryan, I do have the 2020 version. So guys, all of you hearing this conversation, it is possible that what I'm reading is not, what potentially could be modified, but still I'm going to read it. So they say that zone 2 encompasses all non-food contact surfaces in the processing area, such as the exterior of the equipment, framework, food cart, equipment housing, gears, ventilation, watch out, and air handling equipment and floors. That's how the FDA defines a zone 2. So I'm not surprised when I got from one of my clients information that when the FDA performed a swabathon in their facility, they asked for a ladder. They went up into the tiles, the ceiling tiles, lift the ceiling tiles, and swap the support of the ceiling tiles. So when I heard that, I said, okay, my question is now, if they are swabbing, they are verifying. In a system, I need to find the control for that. What is the control? Well, a cleaning procedure for the tiles and the support of the tiles of the ceiling. Do we have that? What is the frequency?
So here, looking at the 2021, that is in there. It looks like they may have clarified this a little bit and said that for small facilities, the zone 2 is all those type of things. But for zone 2 in large facilities greater than 20,000 square feet is the immediate vicinity of food contact surfaces, such as around the exposed product, in which you could envision a pathway to product contamination, either through the actions of man or machine, right? So FDA is saying, okay, investigator, when you're in the facility, if it's a small facility, zone 2 is going to be a whole lot of stuff. In a big open room where you've got lots of things in free range, right? Use your common sense and figure out what are those things circling in the environment? What is orbiting that zone 1? And then calling that a zone 2. So that's interesting. Very interesting. So we'll go over these zones here real quickly, right? So zone 1, all direct food contact surfaces, slicers, mixers, conveyors, blah, blah, blah. Zone 2 we talked about. Zone 3, the area immediately following zone 2. Zone 3 is an area which contaminated with a pathogen could go to 2, right? So what can hop to 2? And then 4 are the other areas outside of that that could hop to 2, right? So that's kind of how FDA is looking at that. Good point, Bryan. Remember to consider.
Yep, good point. I was going to say exactly that.
Good point. Yeah, Bryan's a sharp guy. So first off, FDA is going to be coming in, right? And they're going to be doing something in your facility. Why are they coming, right? So we looked at the ice cream example, and FDA was like, wow, only half of these facilities passed essentially when we went in. There's really 3 categories that FDA is looking at. And I used to think it was 2. FDA has kind of added a 3rd one to the list. So it's for cause. FDA will come in and inspect you and potentially do a swabathon for cause, right? So consumers have reported illnesses for products coming in your facility, things like this, right? FDA had issues with you in the past where you had problems with food safety or environmental monitoring, right? there's a cause of why they're going to be there. The next one is risk. You are producing a product that FDA considers high risk, right? You're a ready to eat product or things like this. Good morning, Nathan. Nice to see you. And the third, Jose, which they've added now, they called it something a little different, but this is how I read it: informational gathering. So if FDA wants to focus in, just like this ice cream example, and they want to look at an industry and do an in-depth environmental monitoring project for that industry, that's now the third cause for FDA to come in. So building their database.
And you know what, Bryan, you were talking about that, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what about that conversation that we had a few chats ago about the traceability records rule for those products that are extremely high risk in that list? Maybe some of them will be actually exactly the reason for these swabatons and environmental testing.
Excellent connection, right? So FDA has spent a lot of time and resources and effort creating the list of high-risk foods that are now required under the current regs that are being written for enhanced traceability, right? So lots of leafy greens, soft ripened cheeses, things like this, right? FDA has said these are high risk. Yeah, I think you're 100%
facilities. Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So when they go in, there's three types of sampling they're doing. So there's the microbiological that we've been talking about, gluten. They're doing gluten. And which is very interesting. Next week, I'm doing a webinar on FDA recalls, and I've been doing a lot of research and digging into that. A lot of recalls for gluten, where people are producing a gluten-free product and they have wheat and they don't realize that wheat's an allergen, and they're getting recalls because of that. They didn't realize it was in there, mislabeled.
Yep.
The third is allergens, and specifically, and FDA calls out this specifically in what I read, is milk. They're specifically looking for milk allergens. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I believe, Bryan, that I was reading somewhere. I cannot recall the source, so I'm not sure. But I believe that I recall that the reason the allergen number one for most of the recalls is milk.
It is. It is. By about a 2-to-1 margin over the next one.
Wow.
So definitely next Tuesday, you can find it on LinkedIn here to find the webinar. EAS is hosting the webinar, and you can go to their site and find it as well. So I went through and did a lot of analysis. And so the data FDA collects around recalls for class 1, 2, 3, things like this, they don't go down into detail. So I actually went through and categorized all the recalls by type. So now I've got that data, and it's very interesting. So anyway, so let's take a look at the investigations operations manual now. And I wanted to point out, Jose, and get your comments back on a few key things in there that I read and went, whoa, right? And now this is the 2021 manual. And again, guys, send me an email and I'll get you a copy of the manual. In particular, what I'm looking at is section 4.3.7.7. And so those zones that we were talking about, that's where that pulled from. And there are conversations around that. This is the first thing that I found very interesting. And this is on chapter 4, page 26. Collect. And so again, guys, this is FDA's Bible, right? This is their methodology of what they want their investigators to do when they come visit you, right? You need to understand that. So this is what they're telling the investigators in the field. Collect finished product only after consultation with CFSAN, right? The Center for Food Science and Applied Nutrition, HFS 605 Division of Enforcement, or is directed in the compliance program or assignment. Whoa, right? It used to be in the previous program that FDA would come in and do samples and things like that, and they may have gone into my warehouse and pulled some random product to test, which caused incredible grief in my system because now I had to hold all the product and wait for the results to come back to FDA. And I would be calling the regional laboratory constantly, is my product released? Is my product released? Can I get the COA? Is my product released, right? As the product is aging in the warehouse. FDA is now saying, nope, we're only going to pull finished product by the enforcement group, which means for cause, right? They are in there for something specific. They may have found that product in the marketplace with a pathogen, and now they're following up and taking samples. That's a big change.
It's a huge change. And Bryan, I have the 2020 version, so I'm going to be reading to everyone from 2020. I'm not sure if there is a change in the new one, but it says there is a section that says for salmonella environmental swabbing, collect at least 100 swabs and ideally 300 or more. But if it's for Listeria monocytogenes, collect 50 swabs and ideally 100, because they said, based on the explanation, that it's harder to find Salmonella than Listeria. So, oh my goodness, we should be using that in our own environmental monitoring programs, because if it's harder for the FDA, it's harder for us too.
Yep. So those numbers have stayed the same. And then here is the comment preceding that section that I found very interesting. I even put a little exclamation point by it. A large majority of the environmental samples collected should be taken from zone 1 when directed and depending on the organism, and 2, and to a lesser degree 3. Very few, if any, environmental samples should be taken from 4.
Yep. I have that comment here too. Yep.
So they're saying
amazing, this document.
Yes. So they're also saying, right, so you need to be looking at this for your program too, right? This guidance is super, super helpful for revising your programs. Every effort should be made to conduct Listeria sampling when the facility has been in production for at least 4 hours and before any wet cleaning is performed. In instances with smaller firms, so you need to have your sampling program during production. A lot of people will sample right after cleaning. Really?
Well, I mean, hold on, Bryan, hold on. Yeah. If you're testing with the intention to identify the effectiveness of your cleaning programs, I will say yes.
No, I agree.
I will say yes. But I mean, then people will need to start testing after maybe, I don't know, I'm going to say 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours after the end of the day. I don't know. But it's up to us to determine that frequency to create that map. So at the beginning, yes, there will be a lot of testing after we create our database and understand what's going on in our facilities.
And again, I think a good way to think about this, Jose, is environmental monitoring, sanitation verification, right? These are 2 things you're doing for both. So you need to think in those terms. So let's see here. So
here's I was able to see that Richard Jacobs just shared the link for the IOM, the manual of the FDA 2021. Thank you, Richard. Yes.
Appreciate that. And yeah, Nathan got into our conversation a little late, but Nathan, we talked about the ice cream facility swabbing. So yes, you're right. You're right on track with us. That's really super important. So this is interesting. Under 43771, CIFSAN has developed guidance on the specific locations within a firm to collect samples to increase the likelihood of detecting Listeria mono and Salmonella. And then it gives some reference materials for the investigators to use. So they're going through and they're targeting, right? This isn't just the investigator saying, let's sample here and let's sample here and we'll pull one. No, right? They're getting detailed scientific guidance from CIFSAN on where to sample. So that was very interesting. This is interesting too. In most cases, it is preferable during discussion with the firm not to mention FDA's intent to collect environmental samples until immediately before sampling begins.
I read that one. Yeah. Okay.
Advance notice of the environmental swabbing may possibly provide the firm with the opportunity for unscheduled sanitation activities. Any such actions by the firm could potentially inhibit recovery and compromise sampling.
Yep, Bryan, and I have one for you. The last one in my, version, it says, the last one before 43772, it says, on occasions, firms may opt to collect their own swabs in conjunction with your sample. If that happens, request the firm to provide their own results once they are known.
Interesting. So this again goes back to your process, and that's a perfect segue, right? Is so I kind of bucketed things at the beginning of this conversation around two things, right? Your program and your reaction, right? So you have your sanitation monitoring and verification activities. You have your environmental monitoring program, right? Again, two different things. But your reaction to those things, if you have positives, what do? You need to have those spelled out. The other side of that is the FDA reaction. You need to have a procedure of what you do when FDA comes in to do this, right? Because you pretty much need to assume if FDA is coming in and they show you something that says we're here for cause, that they're going to do this, right? So if FDA goes out and samples, do you pull duplicates? If you do, what do you do with those duplicates? Do you actually test them? Testing them is risky, right? Because if you have duplicates, FDA does their testing and their results come back, okay, we didn't find anything, but yours are positive. You have to let FDA know that, right? Now you have a positive, right? A negative never negates a positive, right? So as long as there's a positive, you just can't say, I had a negative at that, so we're all good. So you need to think through that. The other side of this, right, is isolation, right? So one of the things I had in my programs in the past is FDA, let's say FDA is going through and doing swabbing, and they swab a zone 1 surface. Immediately behind them, re-sanitize that surface.
Yes.
Because now you've stopped, right? Even if there was a positive, it's like, okay, well, we found listeria on the surface. Okay, well, we sanitize that surface and neutralize that after you swabbed. You should also look at, if FDA comes in, do you continue operation? Or do you shut everything down and go to sanitation?
Bryan, you know what? The only thing that I'm going to say is that when you're swabbing, it is possible that you have some, and I'm going to say chemicals that are not food.
Mm-hmm.
So forget about I mean, not forget, but I mean, the reason why cleaning and sanitation, I'm going to include both. Okay, why cleaning and sanitation should be done after the swabbing? It makes sense because you want to maintain that surface clean.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, absolutely. So, and again, within the context of what I'm talking about right here, right, this is strictly a procedure around how does the facility react to FDA's investigation of what they're doing in your facility. So keep it in terms of that box. Part of this then too is no photography, right? Now it's not listed in this section of the FDA manual, but you need to have really, really strong policies and procedures in facility around the ability to take photographs. FDA claims they have the right to take photographs. That is in dispute, right? So you need to hash that out with your food lawyers on what your company position is for that. Because if FDA is in the facility and they're doing these activities and they want to take pictures, what do you do? What is your response to that with FDA? You need to have these things figured out as a company in advance before FDA ever walks in the door.
Yep. The pictures and photograph, it's a very delicate topic. Okay.
Yes.
In general, and this is my understanding, guys. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a food safety person. I read a lot of the law and the regulation, trying to understand and pull the intent there. But in general, if we are working in a regulated industry and we cannot manufacture food unless we have a permit by registering the company with the FDA, and understanding that all of the records to prove that we're working under sanitary conditions and that we are preventing hazards belong to the FDA, why they cannot take pictures?
Mm-hmm.
You are working with food because they allow you to do that. So that's my interpretation. Again, that's my point.
Yep. This is something your company needs to work out, right?
Yeah.
Pictures are evidence, and they don't always tell the context, right? So how are you going to manage that? And Bryan makes a comment here, right? Be careful where you pick your battles. Absolutely, right?
Yep.
And this is why this is something else, right? As a side conversation around this, why outside legal counsel for food law is so important, right?
Yeah.
Your lawyer in-house may understand mergers and acquisitions and contract law and how to run a corporation and blah, blah, blah. That's not food law, right? You
Yeah.
need a good external lawyer who you trust, and there's some really good ones out there, that you can pick up the phone in a situation like this and have a conversation with them on how to react to what FDA is doing, right? You're going to be able to, through your procedures, figure out most things in advance, but there's always going to be things during inspections like this, right? If FDA is in your facility for a for-cause inspection and 5 investigators show up with boxes full of swabs, things are going to go a little strange, right? They're never going to go the way you expect.
Yeah.
So you need that outside assistance and expertise to help you figure out how to manage that and get through it.
And you know what, Bryan? I mean, maybe it's in my, engineering mind, it's kind of uneasy. But look at this. And I'm going to give you an example for the last minutes that we have here. I'm going to give you an example. So let's say that I want to create a hand washing procedure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The FDA requires hand washing. Fine. I have that requirement. I'm going to create a drug procedure. So I'm going to write down what, how, when, and who on how to wash hands. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to test the hands before swabbing and after swabbing to make sure that they were dirty at the beginning, and then after swabbing, I get whatever is the criteria for a clean hand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I'm going to verify that is by, once I define that my frequencies and my procedure is fine, I may use any other technique. I may use, again, sampling and testing specific for whatever bacteria, but I may use ATP, or I may use enterobacteria, or I may use, a lot of different things. I may swap for verification. That's my point. So my question is, environmental monitoring. What is that? It's a verification activity by default because we are testing. Okay. So what is the actual control for that verification activity? Cleaning and sanitation. Mm-hmm. So instead of using the environmental monitoring to verify a cleaning procedure that is not valid, that may not be valid, why not first work on validating the cleaning procedure, so that way always our environmental monitoring is going to show you're doing great? That makes more sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's the blocking and tackling, right? That's the day-to-day things that you need to be doing to have a clean plant, right? The very specific environmental monitoring for Listeria mono and Salmonella are the very top of the pyramid, right? There's all the other things like you're mentioning, right? So sanitation and GMPs and hand washing and everything else to prevent those things from happening. So again, right, we're back to where we were. So verification and environmental monitoring, right? They're two linked things, but need to be kind of think about differently. So no, that was that, and Bryan says here too. Good point. Thanks. Yeah, I think we made a good one. Yeah, that's you making those good points. So to kind of all bring this home, right, is got the link in here. You can get it from me too. I can get you that. Go through this investigation to operations manual. Look at your procedures, and you're going to have to change them. My bet is 95% of the people who see this and listen to this are going to have to change their environmental monitoring procedures. They're going to have to start sampling for Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella in zone 1s and zone 2s. Right? Of course, like you said, Jose, 3 and 4s, right? You still need to do those. But looking at that 1 and 2, this is going to be a major rewrite. Right? So
yes.
Definitely.
Yes, especially, Bryan, because in the past, nobody wants to test zone 1s and zone 2. And that's a mistake.
Yep, absolutely. And so we all need to revise our thinking around this. But again, right, so this topic for today was at the request of a viewer here on the Food Safety Chat. So thank you. This was an amazing topic and a really, really good suggestion. So please, guys, if you have other suggestions for us on topics, please let us know. Drop us an email. contact us on LinkedIn or other sources to let us know,
Yeah.
and we're happy to do those. So this has been another good one, Jose.
A very good one, Brian.
Yes,
No
and
questions about.
oh, and thank you everybody for attending and putting forth these really, really good questions. We had tons of interaction with everybody today, and that's what makes this thing so much fun. So again, we're here every Friday, and we'll be back here next Friday on May 14th. Wow, May 14th already, right? At 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. East Coast Time, and we'd love to see you here. So I'm also going to put on my LinkedIn page, Jose, I'm going to put an event, right? Because part of the feedback I've gotten is, you know, this thing goes live, and sometimes I forget and I miss it. And I'm like, right. Can you set this up differently? So I'm playing around with this to find better ways to let people know that we're going live in advance so they can plug that in their schedules, because this live piece of it and this interaction is why this is so valuable, I think. So
Yeah.
If anybody's got any suggestions, let me know.
Yep. Good deal.
All right. And with that, Jose, have a wonderful weekend, a Mother's Day and all that good stuff. So we'll see everybody here next week.
Thank you,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
It's been a pleasure. Bye, Brian.